Chapter 1: The Sand That Hides Time. The sun had not yet reached its highest point when the desert began to awaken. West of the Nile, where fertile land gives way to an ocean of golden sand, silence was broken only by the gentle wind and the distant sound of engines. This was no ordinary day. Here, where for millennia time seemed immobile, a modern excavation was about to begin. Dr. Layla Hassan watched the horizon carefully. An archaeologist trained at the University of Cairo with a doctorate in modern Egyptian archaeology, she knew that every excavation in Egypt began not with shovels or brushes, but with permissions, politics, and patience. This mission had taken nearly 2 years to move from paper to reality. Reports, maps, meetings with the Supreme Council of Antiquities, environmental impact assessments, and agreements with local communities. Nothing here was improvised. In modern Egypt, no excavation takes place without state authorization. The land belongs to the country, and every fragment discovered is considered national heritage. Layla was fully aware of this. What they were about to do was not just science, it was a commitment to history, ethics, and the identity of an entire civilization. The team began to gather near the tents set up the night before. There were Egyptian and foreign archaeologists, geophysics technicians, conservators, scientific photographers, and local workers known as sebakin, men who understood the soil better than any satellite ever could. Many of them came from families that, generation after generation, had worked at archaeological sites. Before any physical excavation began, the work had already started weeks earlier, invisible to the public eye. Drones had flown over the area, capturing high-resolution images. Ground-penetrating radar (GPR) sensors had mapped anomalies beneath the sand, suggesting buried structures at a depth of nearly 3 meters. None of this guaranteed a temple, a tomb, or an artifact. It merely indicated that something was there. Layla walked toward the central table where detailed maps were spread out. Every centimeter of the terrain had been divided into an archaeological grid, a precise system that allowed the team to record exactly where each object would be found. In modern Egypt, a mistake is not merely scientific, it can be legal. An artifact removed from its context loses part of its historical value. No shovel touches the ground without documentation, Layla said firmly, looking at the team. Each layer of sand is a page of history. If we tear out pages, we will never understand the full story. The local workers waited for the signal. Unlike the popular image of fast, dramatic digs, the real process is slow, almost meditative. First comes the removal of the surface layer, carried out with extreme care. No heavy machinery, only light shovels, small hoes, and soon after brushes. The sun climbed higher and the heat intensified. Bottles of water were distributed constantly. Modern excavations in Egypt follow strict health and safety protocols. No one works without a hat, breaks are mandatory, and hydration is monitored. The desert does not forgive carelessness. As the workers removed the first centimeters of sand, Layla recorded everything on a tablet. Every change in the soil was photographed, described, and digitally archived. 21st century archaeology does not rely solely on notebooks. It lives in the cloud, in databases shared with universities and institutions around the world. Hours later, something changed. One of the workers raised his hand, calling attention. Layla approached quickly. There, beneath the compacted sand, a straight line emerged, clearly artificial. Limestone. Workstone. Stop everything, she ordered. Silence fell over the site. This was one of the most important rules of modern excavation. At the first sign of a structure, the entire pace changes. Nothing more is removed without full documentation. Scientific photographers went into action. The structure was cleaned only enough to make it visible. Measurements were taken. The wall's orientation was compared with the geophysical maps. Everything suggested that this was not an isolated construction, but part of something larger. Layla felt the weight of the moment. It was not excitement. Experienced archaeologists know that excessive enthusiasm leads to mistakes. Instead, there was responsibility. Any discovery there could rewrite fragments of local history, or simply confirm what had long been suspected. At the end of the day, as the sun began to descend, the excavation was halted. In modern Egypt, work rarely continues at night. Visibility is crucial, and every shadow can deceive the eye. The site was carefully covered, protected against wind and curious onlookers. Layla remained there for a few minutes after everyone else had left. The desert reclaimed its ancient silence. Beneath her feet, a story waited. Not a treasure, not a legend, but the truth, buried layer by layer, waiting to be revealed with respect. She knew this excavation would not be quick. It might take years. perhaps decades. But this was how modern Egypt spoke with its past, not with haste but with reverence. And that was only the first layer. Chapter 2, Permissions, Paperwork and Power. Morning returned to the excavation site with a sharper light and a heavier sense of responsibility. What had been uncovered the day before, a single silent line of limestone, now dictated every decision that followed. In modern Egypt, discovery does not grant freedom, it demands restraint. Before any further soil could be removed, Dr. Layla Hassan's first task was not in the trench but in the administrative tent. A satellite phone rested on the folding table beside her laptop, already connected to Cairo. The Supreme Council of Antiquities required immediate notification of any architectural feature uncovered in situ. This was not merely protocol, it was law. Layla prepared the preliminary report with meticulous care. Coordinates, depth, orientation, soil composition, and high-resolution photographs were uploaded to the central database. Within minutes, the data was traveling through secure government servers, where inspectors and senior archaeologists would review it. The excavation could proceed only if approval was reaffirmed. Modern Egyptian archaeology operates under a delicate balance of science and sovereignty. Every international mission must include Egyptian leadership, and every foreign institution works under strict oversight. Layla had long learned that archaeology in Egypt was as much about diplomacy as it was about discovery. By mid-morning, a white government vehicle appeared on the horizon, kicking up a plume of sand. Two officials stepped out, wearing wide-brimmed hats and carrying clipboards worn smooth by years in the field. One of them, Inspector Mahmoud El-Sayed, greeted Layla with a nod. They had worked together before. "You know the drill," Mahmoud said calmly. "Nothing moves until we see everything." They walked together to the trench. The limestone line, now lightly exposed, lay exactly as it had been left the evening before. Mahmoud crouched beside it, running his fingers just above the surface, never touching. Context was everything. "This could be Old Kingdom," he said quietly. "Or later. We won't know yet." That uncertainty defined modern excavation. The past was never announced loudly, it whispered through fragments. Mahmoud's role was not to interpret but to protect. If the structure proved significant, the site's classification could change instantly, from exploratory to protected, altering funding, timelines, and even international agreements. Back at the tent, forms were signed. Permissions were adjusted. A temporary expansion of the excavation grid was authorized, no more than 2 additional meters on either side of the structure. Layla exhaled slowly. They could continue but only within strict limits. Meanwhile, the rest of the team waited. Archaeologists understand this pause, though it tests their patience. Unlike treasure hunters of the past, modern professionals are bound by layers of accountability. Every artifact belongs to the Egyptian people, and every decision is traceable. When work resumed, it did so at a slower pace. Brushes replaced shovels entirely. The limestone wall extended farther than expected, revealing a corner, then another. It was not a freestanding structure but part of an enclosed space. As the sun climbed, Layla noticed something else, a subtle change in the soil color near the base of the wall. Darker. More compact. She signaled for a sample to be taken. Soil analysis, conducted later in a laboratory, could reveal organic material, traces of flooding, or even ancient human activity invisible to the naked eye. Modern excavations rely heavily on specialists who never set foot in the desert. Back in Cairo, geoarchaeologists, chemists, and epigraphers waited for samples and images. The site was only one node in a vast network of expertise. By afternoon, a new concern emerged. News travels fast in Egypt, especially when ancient stone breaks the surface. A small group of locals had gathered at a distance, watching silently. They were not intruders, they were residents of the land whose lives intertwined with the ruins that surrounded them. Layla approached them with Mahmoud. Communication with local communities is a cornerstone of modern excavation ethics. Without trust, no site remains secure. "We will not disturb anything without permission," Layla explained. "And if something important is found, it will stay here. It belongs to Egypt." An older man nodded. "We've heard that before," he said gently. "Just remember, we live beside your history." His words lingered with Layla as she returned to the site. Archaeology was never isolated from the present. Every excavation reshaped not only academic narratives but real human landscapes. As the day ended, the structure's outline was clear enough to suggest a chamber, though its purpose remained unknown. There were no inscriptions yet, no reliefs, no artifacts to anchor it in time. And that, paradoxically, was a success. The absence of disturbance meant the context remained intact. That evening, Layla joined a video conference with officials in Cairo and representatives from the foreign university funding the mission. Screens flickered to life inside the tent as generators hummed softly outside. "The site remains under preliminary classification," one official said. "Proceed with caution. Any inscription halts all excavation immediately." Layla agreed. She always did. The power to stop an excavation at any moment was not a threat, it was a safeguard. Egypt had learned this lesson the hard way over centuries of exploitation. When the call ended, Layla stepped outside. The stars had emerged, sharp and countless above the desert. Somewhere beneath the sand lay voices that had not spoken in thousands of years. But they would speak only when the time was right. Modern archaeology, she reflected, was not about uncovering the past as quickly as possible. It was about listening, slowly, carefully, to what the earth was willing to reveal. Tomorrow they would go deeper. But only if the past allowed it. Chapter 3: Technology Beneath the Sand. The third morning at the site arrived without ceremony, yet everything had changed. What lay beneath the sand was no longer a hypothesis drawn from geophysical maps or administrative reports. It had shape, boundaries, and consequence. Modern archaeology thrives in this liminal space, where technology stands between curiosity and restraint. Before any soil was touched that day, the site was transformed into a temporary laboratory. A compact trailer near the tents now housed monitors, processors, and calibration tools. Archaeology in the 21st century does not rely solely on hands and eyes. It listens to the ground through machines that translate silence into data. Dr. Layla Hassan stood beside Youssef Karim, the team's geophysics specialist. He adjusted the antenna of the ground-penetrating radar unit, aligning it precisely with the excavation grid. The machine would not dig, but it would reveal. Layer by layer, it would send electromagnetic pulses into the earth, mapping reflections that suggested walls, voids, and anomalies invisible from the surface. "This will tell us how far the structure extends," Youssef explained. "And whether we're dealing with one chamber or several." Layla nodded. Digging blindly was no longer acceptable in modern Egypt. Every unnecessary removal of soil was considered a loss of information. Technology existed to minimize that loss. As the radar unit glided slowly over the sand, the monitor began to fill with abstract shapes, curves, lines, shadows. To an untrained eye, it looked like static. To Youssef, it was a conversation with the buried past. "There," he said, pointing. "That void. That's not natural." The data suggested a rectangular cavity adjacent to the exposed wall. If accurate, it could indicate a sealed room, perhaps untouched for millennia. Layla felt a familiar tension tighten in her chest. Discovery always brought temptation, but protocol demanded patience. Next came photogrammetry. Dozens of overlapping photographs were taken from multiple angles, processed by software that would generate a precise 3D model of the excavation area. This digital replica allowed researchers worldwide to examine the site without physically disturbing it. In some cases, decisions about whether to continue digging were made entirely in virtual space. The workers, meanwhile, observed quietly. Many had seen such equipment before, but each site brought new machines, new rules. Layla made a point of explaining what the technology was doing. Respect flowed both ways. By midday, the sun was relentless. Work paused briefly as thermal cameras were deployed. These sensors detected subtle temperature differences on the ground's surface, differences that sometimes revealed buried stone reacting differently to heat than surrounding sand. The results aligned with the radar data, reinforcing the likelihood of a hidden chamber. Yet technology could not answer the most important question: why it was there. In the shade of the tent, Layla reviewed satellite imagery taken months earlier. From above, the desert seemed featureless, but patterns emerged when centuries of erosion and ancient human activity intersected. The location west of the Nile suggested funerary significance, but nothing so far confirmed a tomb. Late in the afternoon, permission was granted to excavate a narrow test trench toward the suspected void. The decision had been debated carefully. One wrong move could collapse a chamber or destroy fragile contents. Structural engineers, consulting remotely, analyzed the data and approved a controlled approach. The work was painstaking. Centimeter by centimeter, sand was removed. Wooden supports were installed as soon as a hollow sound echoed beneath the tools. The past, it seemed, was indeed empty, waiting. Then at last air moved. A faint rush, barely audible, whispered from below. The chamber had been sealed long enough to trap ancient air. Layla immediately ordered a halt. In modern excavations, safety extends beyond the visible. Ancient chambers can contain harmful gases or unstable environments. Sensors were lowered carefully. Oxygen levels were measured. No toxins detected. Only then was a small opening widened enough to insert a camera. The monitor flickered. The image stabilized. Inside was darkness, then stone. Smooth walls. No visible decoration. The chamber was real. No one cheered. No one spoke. This was not a moment for celebration but for documentation. Screenshots were taken, time-stamped, logged. Cairo was notified instantly. This changes the site status. Mahmoud's voice came through the phone moments later. Full protection applies. The implications were immediate. Security would increase. Work would slow further. Every action now required additional authorization. But Layla felt relief. The chamber, whatever its purpose, was safe for now. As dusk approached, the camera was withdrawn and the opening sealed temporarily. In modern Egypt, restraint is considered success. Many of the greatest discoveries are not those fully revealed, but those preserved for future study. That evening, Layla sat alone, reviewing the 3D models on her tablet. She rotated the virtual chamber, examined measurements, traced hypothetical pathways. Technology had shown her more than her eyes ever could, but it had also reminded her of her limits. Archaeology was no longer about conquering the past. It was about collaboration, between humans and machines, between nations and institutions, between present and memory. Beneath the sand, the chamber waited. Not in secrecy but in silence. And tomorrow technology would listen again. Chapter 4: Ethics, Ownership, and the Weight of History. The existence of a sealed chamber beneath the sand transformed the excavation into something heavier than discovery. From that moment forward, every decision carried ethical consequences that extended far beyond the trench itself. In modern Egypt, archaeology does not operate in isolation. It exists under the shadow of history, not ancient history alone, but the modern history of loss, exploitation, and reclamation. The site awakened that morning under heightened restrictions. Armed guards from the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities arrived before sunrise, positioning themselves at discrete intervals around the perimeter. Their presence was not theatrical. It was procedural. Any structure suggesting a sealed space triggered an automatic elevation in security, a safeguard born from decades of painful lessons. Dr. Layla Hassan understood the significance immediately. This was no longer merely a research site. It was a custodial responsibility. Inside the main tent, Layla gathered the team. The mood was restrained, sober. Gone was the quiet excitement that had accompanied the technological discovery of the chamber. In its place stood deliberation. "We are not here to claim the past," Layla said. "We are here to protect it. Every choice we make from now on will be examined, by authorities, by scholars, and by history itself." Modern Egyptian archaeology operates within one of the most comprehensive heritage protection frameworks in the world. All antiquities belong to the state. All excavation data must be shared. All foreign missions are guests, not owners. These principles were not symbolic. They were enforced, and violations carried severe consequences. Layla's project, though partially funded by an international university, was governed entirely by Egyptian law. Final authority rested not with donors or institutions abroad, but with Egyptian inspectors on the ground. This balance, once controversial, had become non-negotiable. A video conference was convened later that morning. Representatives from Cairo appeared on the screen, joined by legal advisors and senior archaeologists. The tone was formal. "The chamber remains unopened," Layla confirmed. "No physical entry has occurred. Only remote imaging." "Good," one official replied. "That restraint protects not only the site, but the credibility of the mission." Credibility was everything. In Egypt, archaeology carried the weight of a long memory. 19th and early 20th century excavations had stripped the land of untold artifacts, many of which now sat thousands of kilometers away, detached from their origins. Modern policy existed to ensure that such losses would never be repeated. By midday, Mariam Abdulrahman, a senior conservator, arrived from Cairo. Her presence signaled a shift in focus, from uncovering to preservation. She reviewed the environmental data collected from the chamber's interior and frowned slightly. "Even minimal exposure can destabilize an ancient space," she warned. "We must assume that what survived underground may not survive contact with us." This was the ethical paradox at the heart of modern archaeology. To reveal something was often to endanger it. Knowledge came at a cost, and ethics demanded that the price be minimized. Outside the restricted zone, members of the local community gathered again. Their interest was quiet but persistent. These were not tourists. They were residents whose families had lived alongside ruins for generations. To them, archaeology was not an abstract discipline, it was a force that shaped land use, employment, and identity. Layla met with community elders beneath a temporary awning. She spoke plainly. "This site will remain here," she said. "Nothing will be removed without government approval. And whatever is found belongs to Egypt." One of the elders studied her carefully. "And what does Egypt give back?" he asked. It was a question archaeology could no longer ignore. Layla outlined the agreements already in place: local employment, site protection roles, educational programs for nearby schools. These measures were not charity, they were ethical obligations. Modern excavation standards recognize that heritage preservation must include those who live with that heritage daily. As afternoon heat pressed down on the desert, tension surfaced within the team. Some researchers argued that opening the chamber quickly would reduce risk by allowing controlled conservation. Others insisted that delay was the safest path. Emails flew between specialists in different time zones. Opinions conflicted. Layla listened. Leadership in archaeology did not mean imposing certainty where none existed. It meant navigating uncertainty without surrendering principles. By late afternoon, a consensus emerged. The chamber would remain sealed for now. Environmental controls would be expanded. Sensors would continue to monitor internal conditions. No human entry would occur until preservation risks were fully assessed. The decision disappointed some. It relieved others. But it aligned with the core ethic guiding modern Egyptian archaeology: the past does not owe us access. That evening, Layla walked alone along the site's perimeter. Floodlights cast pale circles across the sand, illuminating nothing of what lay beneath. She thought of how archaeology had once been portrayed, as heroic men uncovering lost worlds. That narrative no longer fit reality. Today's archaeologist was less explorer than guardian. Ownership, she reflected, was not about possession. It was about responsibility. Egypt did not own its past as a commodity, it held it in trust not only for its people but for humanity. Yet that trust demanded discipline. Not every discovery needed to be displayed. Not every chamber needed to be entered. Sometimes the most respectful choice was restraint. As night settled over the desert, the site fell silent once more. Beneath layers of sand and stone, the chamber remained untouched, its contents stable, its story incomplete, but intact. Layla felt no frustration in that incompleteness. Knowledge did not require conquest. Understanding did not demand exposure. Modern archaeology in Egypt had learned this through centuries of loss. The weight of history was not something to be lifted lightly. It was something to be carried, carefully, deliberately, and with humility. Chapter 5: Opening the Chamber, Science over Sensation. The decision to open the chamber was not marked by ceremony, countdowns, or cameras. There were no dramatic gestures, no sudden triumph. In modern Egypt, such moments unfold quietly, governed by protocol rather than spectacle. It took 3 days of preparation before the final authorization was granted. Environmental controls were installed around the opening: temporary seals, humidity regulators, and air filtration systems designed to stabilize whatever lay inside. Sensors transmitted real-time data to monitors in the control tent. Every variable was measured. Nothing was left to chance. Dr. Layla Hassan reviewed the final checklist at dawn. Structural integrity, verified. Air composition, stable. Documentation systems, active. Conservation team, present. Government inspectors on site. Only when each requirement was confirmed did she give the signal. The stone blocking the chamber was not removed. Instead, it was bypassed. A narrow access point, no wider than necessary, was carefully expanded just enough to allow entry of instruments, not people. The first intrusion was mechanical, not human. A robotic arm, equipped with lights and cameras, extended slowly into the darkness. The images appeared on multiple screens simultaneously. Smooth limestone walls emerged, unadorned and intact. The floor was layered with fine dust, undisturbed. There were no signs of looting. No modern footprints. Whatever this space was, it had remained sealed since antiquity. The room was modest in size, roughly 4 meters by 3. No sarcophagus was visible. No inscriptions lined the walls. For a moment, some wondered if the effort had led to disappointment. Layla did not share that sentiment. An empty chamber was not an absence of meaning. was a question. Soil samples were collected by suction, minimizing disturbance. High-resolution scans mapped every surface. Laser measurements captured the chamber's geometry to fractions of a millimeter. Each action was logged, time-stamped, and approved. Then the camera paused. In the far corner, partially obscured by dust, lay a cluster of objects, small, irregular shapes resting against the wall. The robotic arm adjusted its angle, bringing the image into focus. Ceramic vessels. Simple. Unpainted. Functional. There was no gold. No jewelry. No hieroglyphs announcing royal names. But Layla felt a deeper thrill than any treasure could offer. "These are storage jars," she said quietly. "Domestic, not ceremonial." The implication was immediate. This was not a tomb. It was something else. As the images were analyzed, patterns emerged. The jars had been placed deliberately, not discarded. Residue analysis, conducted later, would suggest they once held grain or oil. The chamber may have served as a storage annex, perhaps associated with a nearby administrative or funerary complex. The discovery challenged assumptions. Archaeology thrives not on confirmation but on revision. Every structure that defied expectation refined the broader understanding of how ancient Egyptian society functioned beyond temples and tombs. No objects were removed that day. Conservation principles dictated that artifacts remain in situ unless removal was necessary for preservation. The chamber's environment was stable. The vessels, though fragile, were not in immediate danger. Patience prevailed. Outside, the world waited. News agencies had begun to speculate. Rumors circulated online. Some claimed a lost tomb had been found. Others predicted a royal cache. Layla ignored the noise. Science does not respond to rumor. That evening, she joined another meeting with Cairo officials and international partners. The findings were presented plainly, without embellishment. Data, not drama. "This site will not produce headlines," one official remarked. "And that is a success." Layla agreed. The greatest danger to archaeology was sensationalism. When discovery became performance, context was sacrificed. Late at night, Layla returned to the chamber's digital model. She examined the jars, their placement, the wear on the stone floor. She imagined hands filling them, sealing them, placing them carefully against the wall. Ordinary people. Daily routines. Forgotten lives. Modern archaeology had long moved beyond kings and monuments. It sought the invisible majority, the workers, the scribes, the families who sustained civilization. In that quiet chamber, Layla felt closer to them than she ever had in grand temples. The past did not always announce itself in splendor. Sometimes, it whispered through clay and dust. As the site was secured for the night, Layla knew the excavation was nearing its end. Not because there was nothing more to find, but because the most important questions had already been asked. Tomorrow would be about synthesis, drawing meaning from restraint. The chamber had been opened and it had spoken. Not loudly, but truthfully. Chapter 6, What We Leave Buried. The final phase of the excavation did not involve deeper trenches or newly exposed walls. Instead, it unfolded through reflection, synthesis, and decision-making, the quiet work that defines the end of modern archaeological projects in Egypt. In the weeks following the opening of the chamber, the site settled into a deliberate rhythm. Data replaced digging. Analysis replaced anticipation. Soil samples were processed in laboratories. Residue from the ceramic vessels revealed traces of barley and oil, confirming the chamber's utilitarian purpose. Radiocarbon dating placed the activity within a narrow window of the late Old Kingdom, a period marked by administrative expansion rather than monumental ambition. What had first appeared unremarkable became increasingly significant. The chamber was not a tomb nor a shrine. It was part of an infrastructure that sustained ritual, labor, and memory. A space designed not to impress the gods or the living, but to serve them quietly. And in that quietness, it spoke volumes. Dr. Layla Hassan presented the findings in a final on-site briefing attended by inspectors, conservators, local representatives, and members of the international research team. There were no grand declarations. Only conclusions, carefully supported by evidence. "This site expands our understanding of how ancient Egyptians organized space," she explained. "Not every structure was meant to be seen. Some were meant to function." That statement resonated beyond the tent. For decades, archaeology in Egypt had been shaped by visibility, by what could be displayed, photographed, and admired. Temples and tombs dominated public imagination. But modern archaeology increasingly valued what lay behind them: storage rooms, workspaces, supply corridors, and administrative annexes. These were the veins through which civilization flowed. The decision that followed was unanimous. The chamber would not be emptied. It would not be reconstructed for tourism. It would not be relocated or replicated. Instead, it would be documented, stabilized, and reburied. To the uninitiated, this seemed counterintuitive. Why uncover something only to cover it again? Layla addressed the question directly. Excavation is not ownership, she said. And preservation does not always mean exposure. Sometimes the most ethical choice is to leave the past where it survives best. Reburial was a recognized practice in modern Egyptian archaeology, especially for sites not suited to long-term public display. Once fully documented, many structures were returned to the earth, protected by the same sand that had preserved them for millennia. Future generations, armed with better tools and deeper understanding, would decide whether to return. The process was carried out with as much care as the excavation itself. Protective layers were placed over the chamber. The opening was sealed using reversible materials. Sand was returned gently, layer by layer, mirroring its original deposition. No one rushed. Local workers participated in the closure, just as they had in the opening. There was no sense of loss, only completion. The land was restored, not erased. On the final evening, Layla stood at the edge of the site as the sun dipped below the horizon. The guards would remain for a few more days, then withdraw. The tents would be dismantled. The desert would reclaim its stillness. Nothing visible would mark what lay beneath. And that, she believed, was appropriate. Modern archaeology in Egypt was not about leaving monuments behind for credit or acclaim. It was about adding knowledge responsibly, then stepping aside. The true legacy of the excavation would live in reports, databases, and shared understanding, not in exposed stone. As Layla prepared to leave, she thought of the countless excavations that had come before hers. Some driven by wonder. Others by greed. Too many by disregard. The discipline had evolved painfully, learning its lessons through loss. This site, modest and quiet, represented that evolution. It demonstrated how archaeology now functioned in Egypt. Through permission rather than intrusion, through technology rather than force, through ethics rather than entitlement. The past was no longer something to be conquered. It was something to be consulted. Layla placed her hand briefly against the sand, knowing exactly where the chamber lay beneath her feet. Somewhere below, ceramic vessels rested once more in darkness, untouched and stable. They no longer needed to speak. The excavation had done its work. As she turned away, the wind traced new patterns across the surface, erasing footprints, softening edges. The desert, timeless and patient, accepted the return. What had been uncovered was not lost. It was understood. And in modern Egypt, that understanding, carefully earned and respectfully preserved, was the greatest discovery of all.